The Shibuya Incident is a modern masterpiece among shonen manga. This arc honestly deserves to be in the conversation with classics like One Piece's Marineford, Naruto's Pain arc, and Bleach's Soul Society. Much like those three legendary story arcs, Shibuya is the product of careful and methodical planning that stretches to the very first page of the manga, with Sukuna's finger being placed at Yuji's high school by none other than Kenjaku himself, the main antagonist of the story who orchestrated the entire Shibuya Incident. And like those aforementioned classics, Shibuya is a fast-paced action fest with page-turning tension and cliffhangers all across the board. This is the sort of arc where even if you might not be the biggest fan, you definitely had the urge to continue reading just out of natural curiosity for what would happen. And what happens is a complete tragedy, where everybody besides the two most evil characters in the story take massive L's. This arc will definitely go down in history as the turning point that changed everything for Jujutsu Kaisen. Hello and welcome to yet another massive video essay on the channel. If you're watching this on its release date, which is the 31st of October 2022, yes sir, we are dropping an analysis on the arc that took place on Halloween. I recently reread, caught up to the manga, and fell in love with Shibuya, so I decided I have to make a video on it, and what better time to release this than the day it took place. If you're new to the channel and like Jujutsu Kaisen, please do consider watching my analysis on the Hidden Inventory arc and subscribing for future videos on this story. One major difference between this video and the Hidden Inventory analysis is that in this case I will be keeping things as concise as possible and only focus on the really important stuff. Gojo's flashback was only 13 chapters long, and so I tried to discuss every single thing about it, but that's pretty much impossible to do for Shibuya, which is over 4 times its length, unless I make this video 4 times longer. Nonetheless, I hope you enjoy this deep dive into everything that makes Shibuya as good as it is. One of my absolute favourite things about this arc is the structure and how that complements the story being told. The Shibuya Incident is a deep exploration of morality that examines life and death as well as the consequences of our protagonist's previous actions through a very naturalistic lens. It can honestly be boiled down to a bloodbath, with several different battles taking place on the same night in very specific locations that often intersect, and this is all organised very well. The implementation of narration as well as time codes to inform the reader when things are happening makes for an incredibly immersive read, one where the audience feels sucked into these events as their feelings are played with, just like Yuji's, who is physically and emotionally challenged time and time again. The date and setting perfectly complement the narrative too. Like I said, this is a bloodbath, not only for sorcerers and curses, but for your general day-to-day civilians who have been dragged into this elaborate ruse formed by the villains. Shibuya is considered the epicenter of modern Japanese culture, and with that comes a very high population density. This makes it the perfect setting for the plan to seal Gojo, but on top of that, the date they chose is Halloween, arguably the most active night of the year. Not only is this narratively fitting, but it serves a thematic function too. Halloween is the spookiest night of the year. It's a celebration of the dark and the supernatural. Those civilians in that train station probably thought they were just going to be out here trick-or-treating, but Big Boy Kenny had other plans for them. Probably should have stayed at home. One of the most impressive aspects of the Shibuya arc is the manner in which it was set in motion. This is an event we knew was going to happen. We even knew the date of when it would happen, but at the same time, it kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere. I mean, who even pays attention to what date it is in a fictional story, unless they're constantly being reminded of it? We come out of a 13 chapter backstory and we're kinda just thrown into this arc, but honestly that couldn't be more fitting. The setup for Shibuya is shrouded in mystery because this fateful night that changes the story forever was orchestrated by the villains, and we view the story through the lens of the heroes. Well, technically not heroes, they are Jujutsu sorcerers, and this arc goes out of its way to highlight that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get to that when we get to that. The point is, the abruptness of the Shibuya Incident is exactly what makes it so good. We didn't see it coming because the protagonist didn't see it coming, and for the most part, we see what they see. But coming out of nowhere being a stylistic and narratively fitting decision isn't enough to warrant calling this impressive setup, so what else does it have going for it? That's the thing, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It feels like it comes out of nowhere, but in reality it was carefully planned from the very first chapter of the manga. We are constantly reminded of this plot that will take place in the near future, but these reminders are intentionally presented in a way that doesn't fully grasp your attention. It's there, but it's never the main focus. Allow me to explain exactly what I mean by this. I've already mentioned how Kenny planted Sukuna's finger near Yuji's school, but this fits the bill as a easy to miss piece of setup that is really obvious in hindsight. In chapter 10, we are introduced to the main villain group, the Cursed Spirits and their mastermind who was unnamed at the time. We eventually come to know this man as Suguru Geto, with one slight difference in his appearance. He has stitches across his forehead now, something that will be very important to the arc and we will discuss later on. This scene gives us a shit ton of important setup. It establishes the crux of Jogo's character and his ultimate desire. It mentions the prison realm and their goal of sealing Gojo rather than trying to kill him. And of course the two essential components of their plan, immobilizing Gojo and allying with the King of Curses, both necessary prerequisites to their ultimate goal of eliminating all non-sorcerers from the world, at least at this point in time. This conversation segues into Jogo's attempt at killing Gojo. Yes, I know, their names are very similar. There's also Nanami and Hanami, Geto and Toge, Riko and Rika, Mai and Mei, like bro. Gege did not make this easy for the non-Japanese readers, huh? Anyways, Jogo trying to kill Gojo goes horribly wrong, and the only reason I'm even mentioning this is because it reinforces the villain's plans. There is absolutely no way they can kill this guy, so they have to seal him, and they orchestrated everything about their plot in Shibuya to make that possible. Following Jogo's beatdown, who was literally reduced to just his head, we get a very important conversation between the villains. The setting for this conversation is one that will later be used in Shibuya, Dagon's domain expansion. The conversation reveals the all-important date, October 31st, which is explicitly revealed to us as the day the villains will make their move. They chose the right time and the right place to make this ridiculous mission possible, and the fact it kinda feels like it comes out of nowhere is exactly the point. The Shibuya Incident completely blindsided the main protagonists. The entire versus Mahito arc is a prelude to what culminates in Shibuya. The battle of Yuji and Nanami versus Mahito builds the foundation for what's to come between these three characters, and the dynamic formed between Yuji and Nanami creates that strong attachment not only between the characters but the audience as well, ultimately concluding in Nanami's death and the battle between Yuji and Mahito. It also does a brilliant job of introducing Mahito as Yuji's arch nemesis, a character who will stop at nothing to destroy Yuji not just physically but emotionally and ideologically. Unlike the body, the soul can be killed multiple times. This is exactly what Mahito states in the final chapter of his introductory arc, and it's exactly what he accomplishes in Shibuya, breaking down Yuji's frame of mind piece by killing all the people that matter to him. And lastly, this arc also reinforces the villain's need for Sukuna. Mahito learns to appreciate the value of the King of Curses in the pursuit of their ideal world. And the final easy to miss piece of setup for Shibuya is the entire Goodwill arc, at least from the villain's perspective. They create this elaborate plot of using Hanami to interfere in the Goodwill and creating a curtain to deny Gojo's entry, to make it seem as if they were up to something inside of the arena, when in reality that was just bait to allow Mahito to easily steal the Cursed Room paintings kept in the high school storeroom. These paintings give way to the birth of Choso and his brothers who were killed in the Origin of Obedience arc, setting up Choso's motivations in Shibuya and his battle with Yuji. Speaking of Origin of Obedience, we get another important piece of setup there with the brief flashback of the Cursed Room's parents. This introduces us to history's most evil sorcerer, a man by the name of Noritoshi Kamo, whose forehead is carefully blacked out by the shadow of his umbrella, concealing the stitches that would give away his clear connection to Geto and ultimately Kenjaku. Now, Mechamaru versus Mahito. This fight is technically a part of Shibuya, but I want to cover it in this setup portion because it takes place over a week before October 31st. I'm also going to be as brief as possible because, like I said, I aim to make this video as concise as I can, and I'm already over 2k words into this script and we're still on the first chapter. Fuck. This fight reveals Mechamaru as a traitor, a suspicion that was established when the villains found out about the Goodwill, an event they should have had zero knowledge about. In exchange for information, Mahito promised that he would use idol transfiguration to free Mechamaru from his current state. All Mechamaru ever wanted was a body of his own and to walk alongside his classmates. It's a very human and compelling thought process that kinda makes you empathize with him despite, the treachery. Following this reveal is an incredible battle between the obviously Evangelion-inspired Mecha and Mahito. Mechamaru has been accumulating cursed energy for 17 years, which he unleashes on his opponent, who is coincidentally the complete opposite of what Mechamaru has always been. Mahito has the ability to morph between various shapes and sizes. He can be whatever he wants to be through his inherent curse technique. Idol transfiguration is the exact opposite of Mechamaru's heavenly restriction, which literally keeps him shackled to a bunch of tubes in order to actually be of use in the Jujutsu world. This supplements the series' continued exploration of fate as a major theme. I spoke about this a ton in my previous JJK video, so I'll refrain from going too deeply into this aspect of the thematic framework, but it's super important. Gege makes it his absolute mission to explore the consequences of predetermined variables. Many characters are almost entirely shaped by things that can be attributed to fate, such as Gojo, who in some ways is the strongest because of his curse technique. Of course, it isn't that simple, but I think you get the gist. By far the most important aspect of this fight is how it establishes the tone and one of the core themes of what's to come in Shibuya. Mechamaru constantly repeats his desire to meet up with everyone, to stand and fight alongside his classmates in the Shibuya Incident that he knows is coming. This intense desire to stand alongside his friends is something all of the protagonists share in the arc. A defining quality of Shibuya is that everybody is separated. They are forced to deal with things alone. They simply don't have the freedom to stand together, and this rift between all of them is absolutely crucial. It's really beautiful and equally depressing that Mechamaru's contingency plan allowed him to literally be with everyone even after death and provide them with information, despite the fact that he himself is dead and incapable of experiencing this feeling. And lastly, Mechamaru's self-confidence is a huge reason he loses. That is something that shows up time and time again throughout the arc. Characters on both sides end up failing because of a somewhat arrogant belief that they've already won. Immediately after Mechamaru's defeat, we get this fantastic page. A shot that perfectly captures Gege's ability as a visual storyteller. It's very simple but also very efficient. It displays an empty Shibuya on what should be one of the busiest nights of the year. This street should be filled with so many people it fills the entire page, but instead, nothing. Empty. A brilliant way to open up this legendary stretch of chapters. The first portion of the night is arguably the most important. The sealing of Gojo is what makes Shibuya, Shibuya. As much as I love Gojo, this development was absolutely necessary. He needed to be sidelined some way, somehow for the sake of the narrative. Gojo was just too fucking strong for the story's own good, to the point where as readers, knowing Gojo is around completely diminishes any sense of high stakes or tension. It's like if the Straw Hats recruited Kaido. At that point they'd be so strong they should just coast through the rest of their journey, and we as readers would never feel like there's any chance any enemy could defeat them. And don't get me wrong, There was definitely a sense of stakes in previous arcs because Gege created elaborate situations that didn't allow for Gojo's involvement, but there's no chance he could have justified that in Shibuya and the arcs that follow. This is an event that would change the landscape of the entire world if things go badly, and that it did. Everything about this first portion of the arc echoes the fact that Gojo is the strongest, but it's not that simple. The entire reason Gojo technically loses here is because he's not entirely strong. When it comes to physical strength, there is absolutely no denying that he stands head and shoulders above every single other character in the world, with the only potential exception being Sukuna with all 20 of his fingers, and even that is up for debate. Still, Gojo isn't the strongest mentally. Despite having godlike powers, he is very much human, and with humanity comes inherent weaknesses. With humanity comes emotions and memories and regrets. Gojo is defeated by none other than himself. But let me not get ahead of myself. Since the very beginning of the manga, we are told and shown that Gojo is the strongest. He is the pinnacle of power. And that begs the question, how do you defeat the pinnacle of power? The villains lure Gojo into the lowest level of Shibuya Station, which is filled with thousands of passengers who are trapped inside through the use of a curtain. It is established through a flashback that Gojo is in his element when he is alone, with no extra baggage to consider. This speech bubble being drawn as an actual bubble is something that substantiates the villain's plan. They will prevent Gojo from being able to go all out by involving thousands of human baggage. On top of that, they indiscriminately kill those humans in an attempt to attack Gojo, something he considers stupid since they're wasting their only advantage, but ironically, he couldn't be more wrong. The point of placing those humans there isn't just to prevent Gojo from going all out. Of course, that's one major part of it, but another equally as important part is the effects this will have on Gojo's mind. This is a psychological battle. What's the point of being the strongest if countless people are dying and you can't really do much about it? Mahito's arrival with the train of transfigured humans places Gojo in a moral dilemma. He must choose between risking his own life in an attempt to save everyone or sacrificing some of the civilians to fight at full capacity. He eventually chooses the latter, which adds further integrity to Mahito's philosophies about curses and humans essentially being one and the same. Gojo pulls his all-or-nothing gamble, a domain expansion of 0.2 seconds, one of the most ridiculous sequences in the entire manga that is rent-free in my mind till this day. Genuinely one of the coolest things I've ever seen a character do, and it works brilliantly. Not only does Gojo kill every single transfigured human who had been released from the train, but the domain expansion was timed perfectly so that he wouldn't kill any of the civilians. But the mental strain of this decision is what seals Gojo's fate. For all Gojo knows, he just killed all of those civilians. He has no way of knowing this worked because the time frame of 0.2 seconds was merely conjecture, and he had to suffer the consequences of this action had it all gone terribly wrong. Then, to rub even more salt in the wound, the prison realm is activated. The sole condition of using prison realm is that Gojo must stay within a 4-meter radius for an entire minute for it to activate. A condition that sounds so impossible, Jogo lost his mind when he first learnt about it. But Kenny is not stupid. He has all of Suguru Geto's memories, so he knows Gojo better than anybody, and all it took for this condition to be satisfied is Kenny simply showing up and saying hi. Gojo was not only under the impression that Geto was dead, but that he had killed him a year ago on the night parade of 100 demons. So the sheer shock of seeing his one and only best friend again was enough to make Gojo experience 3 years worth of memories in his brain in just an instant. But like Gojo says, this isn't Geto. The term he specifically uses is "my 6 eyes tell me you're Geto, but my soul knows otherwise." This idea of Gojo discerning Geto's identity via his soul when he is almost exclusively known as the all-seeing because of his 6 eyes is very interesting. But much like the fact that Geto's soul is seemingly still inside of the brain's body and fighting back against his control, these 2 points are very ambiguous right now, and so I will refrain from speculating and stick to raw analysis for the purposes of this video. I have a bunch of interesting thoughts on those 2 things, and I definitely intend to make videos discussing them properly, so make sure to subscribe if that's something you're interested in. Anyways, as I previously mentioned, Gojo is defeated by none other than himself. His lingering regrets flooding into his brain upon seeing Geto's body is the very reason he is sealed. But something equally as important as that happens just before Kenjaku shows up, and it is this genius page. Gojo gazes upon the eye of the prison realm, and where his face should be, the defining aspect of a person's identity, is nothing but a void. What Gojo sees reflected in his face is emptiness. Satoru Gojo is the strongest, and that identity is what shapes his entire existence. Everything in Shibuya following this moment is about rescuing Gojo, not because he's a friend or a loved one, but rather because he is the strongest and a necessary tool for the safety of the world. Gojo isn't really viewed as a person, as an individual. He is condensed into his position as the strongest, and in his final moments before being sealed, he finally comprehends that fact in what is one of Gege's most impressive pages in the entire manga. Despite the dire situation Gojo is now trapped in, he has complete faith in everyone to get through this night. This portion of the arc speaks to Jujutsu Kaisen's strong themes of identity, namely the perception of one's identity as well as the consequences of one's past actions. Both ideas are crucial elements to the sealing of Gojo, the event that completely transformed the landscape of this narrative and of course the Jujutsu world. Following the sealing of Gojo, Mechamaru's contingency plan activates and he communicates this dreadful reality to the protagonists who convey this information to everybody else, essentially triggering the true beginning of Shibuya. Everything about this is masterfully executed. The tone and atmosphere changes dramatically to reflect the seriousness of this situation. Things are as bad as you could imagine, and Nanami's words echo that brilliantly. On the villain side of things, there's an internal dispute which turns into a competition. Jogo insists that Yuji is off limits because he wants to turn him into Sukuna to support their cause as originally planned, whereas Choso and Mahito both want to kill Yuji for vastly different reasons. Choso wants to avenge his dead brothers, and Mahito thinks Sukuna is unnecessary to their goals and wants to just be a piece of shit in the most entertaining way possible. The three come to the conclusion that whoever finds Yuji first gets to have their way with him, and I absolutely love how each three of them get to have just that. But the first of the three to find Yuji is Choso. Before that though, we get the 2v1 battle of Yuji and Megumi vs Awasaka. I'm not going to talk about this fight too much because yes, it's brilliant and does a great job of showcasing the capabilities of cursed energy as a power system, but I don't think it's too important to the purpose of this video. There is one thing in the fight that's super important though, Awasaka's brief flashback. Through this, we really get to see the impact Gojo has had on the Jujutsu world and how his sealing is gonna change things dramatically. Cursed users like Awasaka were rendered non-factors in the world simply because of Gojo's presence. His birth completely altered the world, and simply by sealing him, the gears have been set into motion for Kenjaku's ideal age of curses. Anyways, back to Yuji vs Choso. This battle is absolutely fucking incredible. Artistically, it might just be the best in the entire manga. The way Gege draws the water, Choso's blood techniques, the page layouts oozing that Togashi DNA with both Yuji, Choso and his arrows overlapping the panels, the use of impact lines to convey Yuji's speed and make the read feel so immersive, as well as effectively convey the impact behind every punch. The choreography is fantastic and it's just really brilliant artwork from start to finish. The public bathroom setting being incorporated into the fight is really creative too, and it perfectly encapsulates Yuji's character at this current point in the story. He loses the fight of course, pretty badly too, but he tries absolutely everything in his arsenal to win, making use of the water in the bathroom as a natural counter to Choso's blood techniques. The fight goes from a battle of cursed techniques where Choso is just bullying Yuji, and then it transforms into an all-out brawl as they exchange fists in the cramped bathroom. This stuff is just fantastic for Yuji's character. He embraces the fact that he doesn't need to be the one to save Gojo and embraces his role within this war. He is more than prepared to sacrifice his life here, and the only reason he doesn't die is because of a memory born in Choso's brain of a past event that never happened. The exact same thing happens to Todo in the Goodwill, and even though Gege stated that these two moments aren't connected, I do not believe that man at all. He has got to be capping somehow. It literally uses the exact same lines and the exact same thing happened. But much like the Geto Soul stuff, this entire section of the arc is pretty ambiguous and I don't want to speculate in this video. The main thing I love about this fight is the function it serves in the overarching narrative of Shibuya. By delivering this battle that perfectly captures Yuji's character at this moment in time, Gege reminds the audience of exactly the kind of person Yuji is, and that is absolutely essential to the drastic transformation he undergoes later on in the arc. This loss is very important because of how it incapacitates Yuji and gives way to Sukuna's awakening, whose inclusion in this narrative is the core component to Yuji's breakdown. Immediately after the fight, Nanako and her twin sister Mimiko find Yuji and try to carry out their plot of killing Kenjaku, who lied about returning Geto to them, and they plan to do this by awakening Sukuna. So they force feed Yuji a finger, and by doing so they attract Jogo to them, who feeds him another 10 fingers. This awakens the King of Curses, and honestly, this moment is in the Hall of Fame of Jujutsu Kaisen's greatest peaks. It kind of reminded me of Meruem's birth in the Chimera Ant arc. It's one of those character introductions into a narrative that completely changes the dynamics in several ways. From a power standpoint, Sukuna is the strongest person in the entire battlefield now that Gojo is sealed, and on top of that he is the embodiment of evil, which amplifies the sense of dread in the atmosphere. Sukuna's involvement gives off the vibe that truly anything could happen in this arc, and that's established right out of the gate with how mercilessly he murders the twin sisters. Following this, Sukuna interrupts the fight between Kusakabe, Panda, and some cursed spirits, and the way this moment is framed is absolutely fantastic. We get a genuine sense of how it feels to be in Sukuna's presence. Jogo the Madman summons a meteor that does nothing but entertain Sukuna as he stands there clapping his hands. The battle between these two is a one-sided beatdown, with Sukuna killing Jogo without breaking a sweat, and as brilliant as this fight is from a technical and artistic standpoint, I just want to focus on the very end. Jogo has this interesting vision right before dying, and this is something we've actually seen 2 other times in the story. Once in Hidden Inventory when the old bounty hunter that Geto kills sees his beloved dog, and once later in Shibuya when Nanami sees Haibara. These visions or dreamscapes are pretty ambiguous as of right now. Are they simply hallucinations, or are they an actual mechanical aspect of the story? Only time will tell, but one thing we can say for sure is that this moment does wonders for both Sukuna and Jogo, as well as the overall thematic framework of this arc. When speaking about Gojo, I dived into how Gege Akutami has tackled the concept of strength, the differences between mental and physical strength. Ultimately, strength is an abstract thing. There is no single defining way to categorize strength. Everybody has a different view and understanding of what it takes to be strong. The exploration of this abstract concept is crucial to Shibuya and just the overall story at large, and I find it very poetic that this dreamscape consists of 3 curses that were killed by the strongest in their respective fields. Jogo was killed by Sukuna, the strongest curse, Hanami was killed by Gojo, the strongest sorcerer, and Dagon was killed by Toji, the strongest non-sorcerer or human without cursed energy. Sukuna calling Jogo's ideals foolish is directly in line with what Gojo tells Megumi, that Jujutsu sorcery is an individual sport and you should embrace selfishness and an individual identity in battle. No matter how many allies you have around you, you die alone. This complements Mahito's philosophy that humans and curses are the same fantastically. They have very different end goals, but their approaches are essentially the same. The indiscriminate killing of one another in pursuit of a better world as they perceive it. Hanami describes Mahito as a mirror of humans, someone Jogo was propping up as the leader. I honestly see a lot of similarities between the dynamics of Yuji and Nanami, and Mahito and Jogo. I might be looking into things too deeply, but Yuji and Mahito adopt the wills of Nanami and Jogo respectively. In Nanami's case, he left everything in Yuji's hands and trusted Yuji to move forward and finish off the work that he couldn't handle. And in Jogo's case, he believed curses were the true humans, and Mahito adopts this idea but with a very different approach. Like Jogo, he fully believes that humans and curses are one and the same, but unlike Jogo, Mahito constantly grew because his approach reflected exactly what Sukuna was telling Jogo that he should have been doing. Mahito is burning everything to a cinder, without dwelling on things like his future or his identity. He exists purely to wreak havoc and terrorize humanity. On top of this, they both have that relationship where one is super playful and happy, and the other one is always serious and not in the mood. There's probably even more that substantiates this idea of them having similar dynamics, but you guys let me know in the comments if I'm tripping or not. Sukuna telling Jogo he's strong and that he should stand proud is a point of contention within the community. People aren't certain if this is actually Sukuna, and he's actually saying this to Jogo, or it's just a vision that Jogo is having, but that doesn't really matter regardless. The point of this moment is the personification of curses. All throughout the arc, we see curses display very human traits. Jogo's tear after hearing these words is the prime example of that. Curses and humans are antithetical by nature. Curses are the representation of death, and humans are the representation of life. Curses hate humans and kill them in order to survive, whilst humans hate curses and exercise them in order to live peacefully and also survive. They are opposite ends of the same spectrum, fighting for a right to existence and supremacy over the other. Sukuna is the quintessential curse, and his ideology, at least so far, is that you need to take hold over your desires no matter what. His ideology is essentially that you don't need an ideology. Stop obsessing over the why and focus on the how. Embrace that pure carnal desire that lies within and let go of thinking rationally, or even thinking at all. Be like Mahito. Embrace your ambitions and don't try to get other people to do your dirty work like Jogo, who was so focused on trying to get Sukuna on their side. But we've spent more than enough time on this and we haven't even gotten close to the best stuff in this arc. Let's continue. First, let's wind it back a little. Toji is resurrected through necromancy by Granny Ogami, but this man is built so different he broke free of her control. Granny only summoned his body's information, but because of his heavenly restriction, Toji's body is different to an ordinary person's, and so the soul of her grandchild couldn't handle the body, and thus Toji returned from the dead. There is so much about Toji that is really incredible in this arc, but I want to focus solely on the most important stuff. I'm definitely planning to do a full character analysis for him in a separate video in the future, so yeah, probably my third time saying this now, but subscribe if you're interested in that. Toji's entrance into Dagon's domain is a super interesting piece of characterization. There are 3 of his relatives in this domain: his uncle and head of the zen'in clan at the time, Naobito, his cousin Maki, and his son Megumi. They would all bear witness to the naked flesh of the one who set himself free, to the one who left it all behind, and his overwhelming intensity. The nephew, cousin, and father who stripped himself of the zen'in family's curse has returned from the dead and joined the party. What a family reunion, eh? This moment depicts Toji's freedom in a way we are very much familiar with. It's a direct parallel to Gojo in the battle that killed him. I speak about this extensively in my hidden inventory analysis, but the interesting thing about that fight is that Toji was originally free, but by facing off against the pinnacle of everything he has always hated, he succumbs to his inner demons and finds himself shackled by his fate, and the judgment he received by his family for that, the curse of the zen'in clan that Maki has also suffered from. His inferiority complex in the face of Gojo is the reason he died, but now, upon returning after death, we are told this man is free. What makes this even more interesting is how he is referred to as a puppet of carnage fighting solely on instinct in the very next chapter. How can Toji be free if he is a puppet? This is inherently contradictory, but therein lies the beauty. If you know me, I'm a massive fan of Vagabond. It is my favorite fictional work by far, and like Jujutsu Kaisen, it is deeply rooted in Buddhist philosophies. Vagabond makes the argument that free will and determinism can coexist. It's simply a matter of perspective. That is seriously dumbing it down, but this is a JJK video and I don't want to get too off track, but the point is, these inherent contradictions exist within Buddhism. The reason this works really fucking well is because it only works exclusively for Toji as a member of the zen'in clan. His ultimate desire was to abandon his name and his allegiance to the zen'in, and so becoming a puppet of carnage is exactly what makes him free. He has zero identity, he has zero ties to the zen'in, and for that reason, he is free. But there's an even more crucial aspect of this that comes shortly after: the battle between father and son. I titled this section of the video Like Father, Like Son, because the similarities between Toji and Megumi are plentiful. The main one I'll be focusing on is their shared inferiority complex. Both of these characters have deeply rooted insecurities that are coincidentally displayed in the face of none other than Gojo, the strongest. In Toji's case, Gojo is the personification of everything he always hated and desired. The pinnacle of the Jujutsu world, born with the 6 eyes and limitless, cursed techniques that can be attributed to the fate of life. In Megumi's case, it's a little more complicated. Megumi and the person he loves the most in this world, his older sister, were both saved by Gojo. He saved them from the zen'in clan and provided for them financially as well as educationally, teaching Megumi about cursed energy and so forth. This makes Megumi feel like he owes Gojo, but there's an even more important aspect of their dynamic. Satoru is the face of the Gojo family, and they have a strong history with the zen'in family. Both Gojo and Megumi inherited the techniques that represent the pinnacle of their respective families. It's quite poetic that Toji and Megumi are shackled by their inferiority complexes towards Gojo for the exact opposite reasons. Toji was shackled because he didn't inherit a cursed technique, or any cursed energy at all for that matter, and Megumi is shackled precisely because of the cursed technique he inherited, which history indicates should make him relative to Gojo. But the most beautiful aspect of this entire thing is that the person to free Megumi from this inferiority complex is none other than Gojo himself in this conversation. And the complete opposite can be said for his impact on Toji, whose insecurities he reinvigorates after they had been discarded. Gojo teaches Megumi that winning by dying and winning even if you die are two completely different things. His self-destructive behavior up until this point and willingness to just pull out Mahoraga whenever things are looking even slightly tough for him is proof of that. Sure, Megumi would have killed his opponents in those encounters, but he also would have died, so what's the point? Megumi finally conquered his self-destructive behavior in the Origin of Obedience, and it's through his growth here that Toji is finally freed in his second death. I intend to make a video on this in the future, but one of my absolute favorite things about Jujutsu Kaisen is the presentation. Gege is a very meticulous artist, and the smallest details are packed with a lot of meaning. The reason I'm saying this is because whenever you see a black text box in JJK, that is representative of a curse. Not your typical cursed spirits, but words that curse people, like the final words of Yuji's grandpa. For Toji, this curse was his wife's last request. So when he asks Megumi's name and hears Fushiguro, two curses are lifted, the curse of the zen'in clan and the curse of his wife's last words, and he can finally die freely and at peace, knowing that his son isn't going down the same path he did. Megumi still doesn't know that this man was his father, at least not that we know of. Maybe he learned this off screen and we'll get that revealed to us at some point, but as of right now, he hasn't mentioned this a single time. It's tragic, but it's also very beautiful. Toji's character is one that will stick with me for a very long time, and Megumi also has ridiculous potential. I'm very excited to see what Gege has planned to conclude these ideas of fate, specifically in the context of the zen'in clan. Immediately after this, we get the summoning of Mahoraga, but this time Megumi was actually on death's door. This time, it isn't a self-destructive choice, but rather his final trump card and a means for him to go out with a bang. Sukuna intervenes, and of course he has a goal that requires Megumi. We still don't know what that means, but it's used to resuscitate Megumi after being smacked into a state of suspended death by Mahoraga. To properly illustrate why Mahoraga is so powerful, this one line is enough. Not a single user of the 10 Shadows technique has ever been able to exercise Mahoraga. Never in history. The zen'in clan members of the past who used to fight toe-to-toe against 6 Eyes and limitless users of the Gojo clan? Nope. Even they couldn't tame Mahoraga, and 15 Finger Sukuna washes him with low to medium difficulty. Absolutely insane. There's not much to analyze about this thematically, but what this does for the dynamics of the arc is ridiculous. In this fight, Sukuna eradicates all humans in a 140 meter radius of his domain expansion, and that serves as the linchpin for the deconstruction of Yuji Itadori. I can already see the comments talking about how I'm misusing the term deconstruction and blah blah blah. It's funny because those exact people probably don't understand what deconstruction even means in the academic sense, but I digress. Regardless, I'm not gonna get overly philosophical and use this term in its traditional form, but rather my point is that the character constructed in the previous 100 or so chapters is completely deconstructed and then reconstructed in this final stretch of the Shibuya arc. It annoys me to no end that people care so much about the word you're using when they're really just words, and as long as you convey what you're trying to say by using said word, it doesn't matter at all. People spend hours arguing semantics, but it's words, they're fluid. People use words differently and interchangeably. As long as you explain what you mean, it's fine. Anyways, chapter 120 is my favourite in all of Jujutsu Kaisen. From the very beginning of the series, Yuji had a very altruistic look, which essentially means he was very selfless and showed an extreme concern for the well-being of others, even complete strangers or transfigured humans that are already beyond saving. This made Yuji the generic shonen protagonist, until everything changed as a result of that fateful Halloween night. Yuji goes from someone who ignorantly believes he can save everyone and make the world a better place, and turns into someone who is forced to yield due to this environment he is trapped in. This compassion and altruism is challenged right from the very beginning of the manga. And that's why I view Yuji's character through a deconstructionist lens, because even though this might not have been intentional by Gege, the way his character is formed is very much like building a structure, breaking it down, and rebuilding it into a completely different structure with those broken down pieces. Forgive me for the terrible analogy, but allow me to paint my point. Yuji's character can be boiled down to the idea of individual agency versus conforming to the system. For the first half of the manga, he is his own moral agent. He has his own sense of self, his own identity, his own outlook on the world, and his own strong beliefs on how things should be. At that point in the story, Yuji is what fans of Dungeons & Dragons would call a lawful good on the moral alignment. He just wants to spread happiness indiscriminately with complete selflessness. But through Mahito, Gege Akutami challenges this idealistic attitude again and again and again, and this ultimately culminates in Shibuya, which changes him forever. When Yuji finally takes control over his body again and is forced to bear witness to all the terrible things Sukuna did while he was in control, he begins to vomit uncontrollably. He blames himself for Sukuna's actions as his vessel and considers himself nothing but a murderer. From Yuji's perspective, had he been able to defeat Choso and stay on his feet, this never would have happened. As previously explained, black text boxes represent curses, and this page is the quintessential example of that. Yuji is cursed by himself, by his grandpa, and later on in this chapter, he is cursed by Nanami. And something we can learn from Nanami's curse is that curses, well, the ones that are words, don't come from the person who said those words, but from the person who heard those words. It ties into those very strong themes of perception in Jujutsu Kaisen. How you see things is more important than what you're seeing. And on the topic of seeing things, Yuji has to see Mahito killing Nanami, the same person who killed Junpei, thus making him the person Yuji hates most in this world by far. Nanami's final words to Yuji are a double-edged sword. They push Yuji on to continue fighting and move forward, but they also curse him, making Yuji feel as if he has to do this for Nanami's sake, when truly Nanami would have been happier had Yuji attempted to retreat here and prioritize his own well-being. He changes his last words from whatever they originally would have been so as to not curse Yuji. But of course, that fails, and even if it didn't fail, it would have been short-lived, because shortly following Nanami's death, we get the death of Nobara. Now, I am aware Nobara has some fantastic stuff for her character in Shibuya, and that she might not be dead, that's a huge point of contention, but I won't be diving into any of that here. I don't really think it's necessary for the point of this video. What I will be talking about is how Nobara's death affects Yuji. The thing that makes this death so painful for Yuji is that literally just moments before she is killed right in front of his eyes, she lands a very effective blow on Mahito's clone that supports Yuji in his fight against the original Mahito, and that momentarily saves Yuji from his isolation. Thank you for showing me that I'm not alone. This speaks to the idea established by the Mechamaru fight right at the beginning. How characters are separated and forced to deal with stuff in isolation, which further adds to the sense of darkness and dread. But unfortunately for both Yuji and Nobara, Mahito is as evil gets, and he lands a killing blow on Nobara right in front of Yuji. Losing to Choso, Sukuna's massacre, Nanami's death, and now the death of Nobara. As wonderfully stated by the narrator, Yuji's resolve had reached its limit a long time ago. And to rub salt in the wound, Mahito lands a black flash, and this page right here is honestly one of the biggest reasons why I even titled this section the deconstruction of Yuji. The sparks of black do not choose who to bless. This is the narrator quite literally going back on their original statement in The Origin of Obedience, where they refer to Yuji as the man chosen by the black sparks. Everything that makes Yuji, Yuji is broken down. He is sat there feeling weak, hopeless, terrified, and suicidal. At this point, he just wants to die. He can't continue fighting, and he doesn't want to fight either. Yuji has been completely defeated in the physical sense, the emotional sense, and what's about to come is even more important as Mahito's speech completely destroys Yuji in the ideological sense. This is war, a clash of truths. You are me, Yuji Itadori. I kill without a second thought, just like how you save people without a second thought. A curse's instincts are diametrically opposed against the dignity of human reason. Shibuya is a battle to determine who will be left standing in 100 years. Tell me, Yuji, have you ever stopped to count how many curses you've killed? No, right? Me neither. Like I care about how many people I have killed. In the words of King Recon, this speaks in the universal language of goat, raw, fire, and peak fiction. The way Mahito completely crushes everything Yuji thinks he knows about the world, and Yuji can't even deny how true his words ring. Like, this shit reminded me of the Pain arc, where Pain's speech on the cycle of hatred just leaves Naruto speechless. Yuji and Mahito are on opposite ends of the same spectrum, and holy shit, that's like the 10th time I've said that in this video, but it's just seriously so important to this story. Yuji doesn't feel bad when he kills a curse. He thinks he's doing the right thing and helping people. Same way Mahito doesn't feel bad when he kills a human, albeit for very different reasons. Their approach is different, but the end result couldn't be more similar. Curses and humans are the same, and Yuji and Mahito are the quintessential examples of their similarities. Now that Yuji has been completely broken down, it's time for him to be rebuilt, and of course that begins with the arrival of Todo. The words from Todo in chapter 126 is a direct quote from the opening verse of the Heike Monogatari, an epic account of the fall of the Taira clan and the ascension to the center of power in Japan. This book is regarded a classic among classics in Japanese literature, and the quote's original context is talking about how all things are bound to be destroyed. The theme of unavoidable destruction is massively important to not only Heike Monogatari but Japanese literature as a whole. But Todo changes the quote. He adds the final part, however, we are the exception, which kinda goes against everything the quote represented to begin with. It's about how all things are bound to be destroyed, but Todo claims that we, meaning Jujutsu sorcerers, are an exception. He follows up on these words in the next chapter in response to Yuji's current state. Mahito's words have shaken him to his core and he cannot forgive himself. To which Todo responds, do not limit yourself to such narrow-mindedness, and proceeds to deliver a speech that strongly resembles Erwin's final words. As long as we sorcerers live, our friends who have passed away will not truly have been defeated. We are simply a part of the bigger picture. By continuing to move forward, we carry our fallen comrades' hopes and dreams with us and add meaning to their sacrifices. If we give up, then they would have died for nothing. Todo ends his speech with an open-ended question. What have you been entrusted with, Yuji? You don't need to answer right now, but until you find your answer, you cannot stop moving. For Jujutsu sorcerers, that is the punishment they must endure. This is such a powerful moment that pulls Yuji from his absolute lowest state so far, and the thing that makes this so powerful is that it serves as the foundation for who Yuji becomes from this point onwards. Yuji has submitted. He now conforms to the system. He considers himself a cog in the machine, a necessary part of the Jujutsu world, and he will fulfill his role. He doesn't have that individual agency he once had. He is a completely different person to who he was before Shibuya. His sense of self has been warped since this fight with Mahito, and this is something pretty bad for Yuji's mental state. He has abandoned all individuality, and this is framed by Gege to feel like a strength, and funnily enough, it's the exact opposite of what Sukuna was preaching to Jogo. I'm almost certain that Yuji's character will be deconstructed and reconstructed, or broken down and rebuilt for those who hate that word, once more before the end of the story. He will gain his sense of individuality again, but this time with clarity and full understanding of what exactly that means, so nothing can diminish that. Not even Mahito killing everyone he loves and rubbing his naive mindset in his face. Todo's words about having to move forward are completely in line with this cog mentality that Yuji now has. A cog functions by moving. It's quite literally the purpose of a cog in the literal sense. And immediately after this speech, we see this mentality form. I'm sorry, Nanamin. I was about to use my sins as an excuse to run away. I'll be sure to take on your share of suffering too. What happens when one cog in a machine stops working? Obviously, in the literal sense, the entire machine stops working, but in Jujutsu Kaisen, when someone dies, in this case Nanami, the other cogs have to take on their role and continue their job to keep the machine running. They have to take on their share of suffering. And all of this culminates in the final chapter of the fight. This idea of working together, this conformity, it's the only reason they come out on top in this fight against Mahito. After losing a hand, Todo makes the greatest bluff in the history of bluffs and pretends his curse technique will still work, which gives Yuji the opportunity to land the decisive blow, and then we get this, Yuji's moment of acceptance. He actually agrees with Mahito, and he's come to the realization that they are in fact the same even if they may be on opposite ends of the spectrum. Yuji has accepted his role in the bigger picture that Todo explained, and he doesn't need a reason or a meaning behind it. He will continue killing curses until he gets his answer. And that is when we see Yuji, the white wolf and predator, pouncing on his prey, Mahito the rabbit. Absolutely masterclass conclusion to this battle, but the arc is not over. We've got a little bit more to talk about. Originally, I was going to talk about the conclusion of the arc and the aftermath in separate parts, but honestly, they really go hand in hand. Kenjaku's performance in these final chapters is inherently linked to the effects of this night that changed the Jujutsu world forever. Kenjaku appears in front of Mahito, who is literally crawling away from Yuji in the snow. A pitiful display of his cowardice, but more importantly, his instinctual impulse in the face of death. The fear of death is a predisposition that nobody is exempt from. Not curses, not humans, nobody. He calls out to Kenjaku using the name Geto, which potentially functions as an interesting caveat that prepares the reader for what's to come. Why does Mahito think the brain is called Geto? Do they not know his true identity? Or does he just go by the name Geto now? Kenjaku asks Mahito if he should save him, and he proceeds to casually handle Yuji, who is screaming for Gojo. Within the span of a couple pages, Kenjaku leaves Yuji looking worse than he has at any other point in this arc, which is saying a lot considering the beatings Yuji has received. He goes on to use Geto's curse technique and exercise Mahito, and what follows is honestly the most satisfyingly embarrassing thing that could have possibly happened to Mahito. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is Mahito's face on the Uzumaki, right? It looks like it has stitches on his face, so I'm guessing it is, but even if it isn't, doesn't matter because Uzumaki literally combines all the cursed spirits Kenjaku has absorbed into one, which means Mahito's included, and this is such a poetic conclusion for that piece of shit. Mahito, who would have the time of his life transfiguring humans to use them as weapons, has been transfigured among other cursed spirits to be used as a weapon. It ties so well into the idea of curses and humans being two sides of the same coin, and just a wonderful conclusion for Mahito, even though there is a genuine possibility this isn't the end for him. Amazing part, and it's not even the best thing that happens here, because Kenjaku starts flexing his Aizen level planning. When Gege said he's a massive fan of Kubo, he wasn't lying. You can really feel the Bleach inspiration here. The conclusions of Shibuya and Soul Society feel very similar, with both main antagonists embarrassing a group of the protagonists as they flaunt their ambitions for the future. Kusakabe, Panda, and a bunch of the Kyoto students are here, and they serve the role of being Kenjaku's punching bag so he can flex his unbelievable power. Funnily enough, one of the Kyoto students is Noritoshi Kamo, and that's also one of Kenjaku's names in the past. Choso shows up and delivers one of the best reveals of the series so far. That brief exposition of history's most evil sorcerer over 70 chapters before this moment comes full circle. His forehead was shaded out because it has those signature stitches that identify Kenjaku. The man who toyed with Choso's mother, his third parent, is but one of Kenjaku's countless hosts. We get incredible action sequences, beautiful moments of Choso displaying his commitment and loyalty to Yuji, who he thinks is his brother, and to top it all off, Yuki Tsukumo arrives on the scene, the woman who unintentionally gave Geto the keys that unlocked his insanity. And this is where we get a massively important narrative decision that is crucial to the aftermath of Shibuya. I said Kenjaku had Aizen level planning, and that was not an understatement. Kenjaku set up multiple pieces before the Shibuya arc to prepare for the world to come, the world of Heian, the golden age of cursed techniques he wishes to revive. Not only does he reveal that Yuji ingesting Sukuna's finger was all a part of his plan, Kenjaku marked various non-sorcerers before the night of Shibuya so that once he consumed Mahito, he could use idol transfiguration to tamper with them. He awakened Megumi's sister from her slumber, gave strength as vessels to the people he made ingest cursed objects like he did with Yuji, and he gave various non-sorcerers the capacity to use cursed techniques. And to top it all off, he revives countless curses from centuries ago. All of this to deepen the understanding of cursed energy by having them all fight each other, a setup for the Culling Games which shortly follows the end of Shibuya. Kenjaku is a ridiculous antagonist in such little time, and with later stuff he gets even better, and that Aizen level planning is further reinforced with some insane reveals. In my opinion, the best part of this final chapter is the part where Yuki and Kenjaku discuss the next stage of humanity. It's a callback to the conversation Yuki has with Geto in chapter 77. Either eradicate cursed energy entirely or optimize cursed energy by teaching non-sorcerers how to use it. And this is the first time in the manga where we get a glimpse at Jujutsu Kaisen's international politics, covering nations other than Japan. Yuki explains how Japan has a monopoly on cursed energy, and if other countries like the United States or countries in the Middle East were to find out about this, they would definitely interfere and it would create chaos like never before. It's kind of funny that Yuki mentions how far removed this is from what she wants, like Kenny gives a fuck, but what he says after this is the most intriguing thing we've had from him in the manga so far, at least in my opinion. Kenjaku is like a mad scientist. He isn't pursuing power for himself, but rather something that can surpass himself. No, not just himself, something that can surpass humanity itself. He wants to force evolution upon the human race to see the potential they hold, to change the world no matter the cost, even if this means mass destruction. It's a very interesting direction to take your main villain, especially in a Shonen Jump manga where we are so used to villains who are ultimately self-serving for the sake of power. And of course, the very last page of Shibuya is almost exactly like the very last page of Soul Society, the main villain expressing interest in the main protagonist. I cannot wait for the next time Yuji sees Kenjaku. And there it is, the Shibuya arc is over, but there is just one last thing I need to discuss. The impact of this night on the rest of the world. Honestly, these 2 pages kinda speak for themselves. There is a literal void where Shibuya used to be. 23 wards were almost entirely destroyed. Over 10 million cursed spirits were released. The country is in an uproar. Shibuya has not only completely changed the landscape of the Jujutsu world, but the tone of the story we are reading. There's no more shits and giggles and happy moments between our characters anymore. Shit has hit the fan in the worst way possible, and to top it all off, now that Gojo is sealed, the higher ups want to kill Yuji again. Then we also have the deal of Jujutsu sorcery becoming common knowledge. Honestly, we could talk about the political impacts of the Shibuya arc for days, and that's why I love this double page spread so fucking much. Like, I'll be honest, I did not want to read all that, but it perfectly conveys how chaotic things are as a result of the Shibuya incident. How the hell are they supposed to move on from this night? And to think, all of this could have been prevented if just one man didn't get sealed. The impact of Gojo in the Jujutsu world is absolutely ridiculous, and there are very few characters who fit that archetype of the strongest in their universe that can even come close to having this level of narrative influence. It is so impressive how Gege pulled this all off, and this is just the first major story arc in the series. What on earth does Gege have in store for the rest of the Culling games, because topping this is not going to be easy. Anyways, I think that's it for this video. I actually wrote this entire script in a single day, close to 11,000 words in about 8 hours, so please do forgive me if I made some mistakes or left out something you thought was worth mentioning. I would really appreciate you commenting if you have any insight you would like to share, whether that may be criticism or just appreciation for my analysis. And I already know a bunch of comments are going to be about my usage of the term deconstruction, and so be it. Like, I actually really am interested in what you guys have to say, as long as you elaborate and don't just spout random nonsense at me. I get this word really annoys people for some reason, but I truly think it conveys Yuji's character arc in Shibuya pretty well, and if you disagree, please let me know why. With that being said though, thank you very much for watching, and I hope it was worth your time. I've been Fiji, peace. Wait, not Fiji. I've been Radman, peace. I'm leaving that in.